Sejam todos e todas bem-vindos aos nossos webinars do SubConst, que é o núcleo de pesquisa, o núcleo de pesquisa em subconstitucionalismo da Universidade Federal de Mato Grosso do Sul. É uma satisfação receber a professora Erika Arban, que eu já vou fazer a apresentação de vocês, pesquisadora da Universidade de Melbourne, na Austrália. Agradeço a presença da professora Gesiela Ienso, e coordenadora também do projeto de pesquisa e núcleo de pesquisa. Agradeço a presença do professor Marcelo Labanca, da Unicap, nosso parceiro de sempre. Seja bem-vindo, professor. Agradeço a presença também do professor Christian Altavija, da Universidade Nacional de Córdoba, Argentina. Seja bem-vindo também, professor Christian, obrigado. Ambos serão os debatedores, né, os discussants dessa tarde. Agradeço a todos os presentes, a todas as presentes, especialmente a nossa conferencista. Thank you so much, Professor Erika, to join us, and we know that we will learn a lot with you today. Ok? A professora Erika Arban, ela é pesquisadora associada sênior no Laureate Program in Comparative Constitutional Law na Universidade de Melbourne, Melbourne Law School, Austrália. Tem como campos de pesquisa federalismo comparado e direito constitucional comparado, especialmente, além da metodologia da pesquisa. Entre 2016 e 2021, lecionou federalismo comparativo na Universidade de Antwerpen, na Bélgica. É doutora pela Universidade de Ottawa, no Canadá, com a tese Regionalismo Italiano e Desafio Federal, premiada com a medalha de ouro do governador-geral de melhor tese na área de humanidades. É mestre pela Universidade do Arizona, nos Estados Unidos da América, e bacharel em Direito pela Universidade de Trieste, na Itália. Lecionou na Universidade de Ottawa, no Canadá, e é autora de diversos livros e artigos, na verdade, uma referência no nosso campo de estudo. Very welcome, Professor Erika Arban, que vai falar hoje para nós sobre o tema Direito Constitucional, Federalismo e a questão da unidade. With the word, Professor Arban, thank you so much again.
Well, thank you so much for this very generous introduction. Thank you to you, Professor Sgarbosa, and to the organizers of this SubConst webinar for the opportunity that I have to present my research and my work.
Bem, gostaria de agradecer aos organizadores, ao professor Luiz Fernando, por essa oportunidade de participar desses webinars do SubConst e poder apresentar os resultados das minhas pesquisas.
Okay, let me begin by saying that the presentation that I will giving today builds on a paper that I am currently working on. It is a new project, so it is in a way still work in progress, which means that some of the ideas and the arguments that I'm going to make need some refining. It also means that more than providing answers, I will be raising a few questions, especially in the last part of the presentation. So just questions without actually having the answers yet. But I am very happy to give this presentation here today because I am very interested in learning a little bit more from the Brazilian experience and also from the Argentinian experience. So in other words, where Brazilian federalism, Argentinian federalism stands in relation to some of my claims. And I also hope that some of the questions that I will be raising at the end of the presentation will give an opportunity, perhaps if there is a time, for a little bit of discussion.
Ok, gostaria de dizer que os temas sobre os quais eu vou falar aqui dizem respeito a alguns trabalhos em andamento ainda, especialmente pesquisas em andamento, projetos novos que eu venho desenvolvendo, e que eu tenho mais questões, talvez, do que respostas para apresentar hoje, principalmente no que diz respeito à parte final da minha fala. Então, tenho também interesse em conhecer um pouco sobre o sistema brasileiro, sobre o sistema argentino, esses dois federalismos, e gostaria, evidentemente, se houver tempo disponível, de fazer alguma discussão ao final.
So to begin with, let me briefly give you some background information on how I got interested in this particular topic, that is the interconnection between constitutional law, federalism, and the unit. So what triggered my intellectual curiosity was something that Professor Ran Herschel wrote in his book, in his last book on cities, the book City-State, Constitutionalism and the Megacity. So what he was saying at some point was that he invited scholars to reflect a little bit more on constitutional units, on federal units, contending that constitutional law and federalism theory continue to be dominated by what he calls the Westphalian state model. The Westphalian state model, which is premised on this notion of sovereign territorial states, which are divided along ethnic, religious, linguistic lines, and often reflecting notions of statehood, nationhood, peoplehood, or patterns of conquest and settlement. So what Ran Herschel was saying was that in this scenario, the unit that is normally applied in constitutional law in federalism is the Westphalian state or some Westphalian state size subnational unit, without actually having any real comparative discussion on whether other types of units may exist or may come into play. Of course, when he was making this claim, his attention, his focus was on cities, particularly on megacities, which, as we know, as a general rule, do not have any constitutional space or constitutional status at the moment.
Primeiramente, deixe eu contextualizar um pouco vocês sobre quais foram as razões que chamaram minha atenção para esta temática. Né? Se trata de uma obra recentemente publicada pelo professor Ran Herschel sobre as cidades, as megacidades, e no qual ele traz uma série de questionamentos e faz um convite aos acadêmicos para que passem a refletir sobre quais são as unidades de análise que nós devemos levar em consideração ao discutir o federalismo. Ele evidencia nesse livro de que o modelo de Estado que predomina nas discussões sobre o federalismo é o modelo westphaliano, ou seja, oriundo da Paz de Westfália, e que, em geral, as pesquisas estão focadas ou no Estado soberano como um todo, em seu território, população, soberania, ou nas unidades primárias, nas quais esse Estado se subdivide como os Estados, mas deixa de lado outras unidades que talvez pudessem ou devessem entrar na análise, especialmente os municípios ou as cidades, e em particular as megacidades. Então, é essa discussão foi essa provocação que trouxe o meu interesse para a reflexão que nós vamos fazer hoje.
Yes, and besides Ran Herschel, there were other political theorists, federalism theorists, who have made similar claims. For example, the American political theorist Jacob Levy, whose work is quoted, is cited in Ran Herschel's book, also argued that federalism is normally understood. The way we understand federalism is that of this arrangement between the central government and a number of states and provinces, but many other units of government exist. The problem is that they lack constitutional status, and because they lack constitutional status, they tend to be invisible or ignored to constitutional theorists, federalism theorists.
Existem outros autores que fizeram provocações semelhantes ao do professor Herschel, como, por exemplo, o norte-americano Levin, Jacob Levin, e que evidenciam exatamente isso, que existe uma importância em outras unidades que não são os estados, e que, em função dessas unidades não terem um status constitucional, elas acabam sendo esquecidas ou secundarizadas, e isso é que tem levado a novas pesquisas envolvendo exatamente a questão das cidades ou dos municípios e seu status constitucional.
So when I was reading Ron Herschel and when I was working on Ron Herschel's book, I was also working on cities. In fact, I found out that Professor Herschel and myself, we were working on cities at the same time. We met for the first time while he was still working on his monograph, and I was trying to organize a workshop in Melbourne on cities, and so we tried to exchange a few ideas in this regard. So I was working on cities. I was working on other types of asymmetry, socioeconomic asymmetries in federalism. But I thought that contributing to the debate on constitutional law units, on federalism units, would be an interesting way to situate my work on cities and on socioeconomic asymmetries. So, sorry, if you want to translate.
No problem at all. Eu trabalhava já com essas questões de municípios e pesquisava, estava trabalhando em municípios, inclusive organizando um encontro na Universidade de Melbourne acerca dos municípios, quando encontrei com o professor Herschel, que estava trabalhando exatamente nessa sua monografia, que foi recentemente publicada a respeito dessa questão dos municípios. E eu me preocupava também com algumas outras questões, como, por exemplo, as assimetrias socioeconômicas que existem, além das assimetrias jurídicas, né, em diversas federações.
So, drawing upon Herschel and Levy, in my paper, I try to explore this unit question in broad theoretical terms. But before delving into my presentation, let me make 3 disclaimers. So, first, federalism represents in my paper and in my presentation the main theoretical framework in which I situate my arguments. But of course, nothing prevents to apply some of the reasoning also to constitutional law more in general. Second, when I speak in my paper and also in my presentation of federalism and federal systems, I embrace a rather generous understanding of federalism and federal systems, meaning that I include in this discussion also systems that are quasi-federal or hybrid, and I will be talking a little bit about Italy. So it's a broad understanding of what federal systems are. And the third, most of the examples that I will give and I will use are mainly from Europe and North America, because these are the jurisdictions that I am more familiar with. But as I said, it would be very interesting to learn a little bit also from the South American perspective, whether, you know, the arguments that I make fit into the specific Brazilian and Argentinian systems.
Eu tenho que fazer 3 observações antes da minha apresentação, que dizem respeito tanto ao meu artigo quanto à minha apresentação de hoje. A primeira delas é que o federalismo é o panorama geral, ou o quadro geral dentro do qual eu vou fazer minhas reflexões. Mas é óbvio que existem inter-relações também com outros campos, especialmente com o direito constitucional. Em segundo lugar, é que o meu conceito, ou o conceito que a gente vai abordar aqui de federação, é um conceito mais amplo, mais abrangente. Ele abrange ou compreende, portanto, não só as federações, formalmente falando, mas também os estados quase federais, né? E por isso mesmo falaria um pouco da Itália, que é uma organização territorial peculiar nesse sentido. E, em terceiro lugar, os meus exemplos vão ser mais focados na Europa ou na América do Norte, porque esses são sistemas que eu conheço melhor, embora eu tenha interesse em aprender um pouco mais ou saber um pouco mais a respeito de outras experiências federais, como as da América do Sul, da Argentina ou do Brasil.
Okay, so in my paper, I introduce the unit question in these terms as I see it. So following Herschel and a few others, apparently not much discussion, comparative discussion has occurred on federal units, on constitutional units. This, however, triggers 2 interrelated questions. Is this really the case? And if so, then which other territorial entities have the potential to become federated units, which other territorial entities could be considered, could be upgraded to unit status. Now, to explain the relevance of this question, I resort to the work of the American American federalism scholar, Jenna Bednar. Now, Jenna Bednar claims that in a federation, we have at least two types of boundaries. On the one hand, we have geographical boundaries, meaning the boundaries of the various federated entities, the physical boundaries of the federated entities. And then on the other side, we have authority boundaries, boundaries that are perhaps less visible, they are more abstract. And these are basically the constitutional provisions that distribute power and authority between the different levels of government. Now, how authority is distributed, of course, affects the way the federal system performs. And at the same time, how geographical boundaries are drawn also affects the way the federal system works. So the meaning of the physical boundaries cannot be fully understood, fully grasped, without also examining the authority boundaries. And the opposite is also true. We can't fully understand authority boundaries without also considering the geographical or the physical boundaries. So the two, the physical and the authority boundaries, are very much interlaced.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
And so the way units are drawn is important. Now, there is, as we know, an extensive or an existing literature that already analyzes the conflicts of attribution that emerge between different levels of government. We know that there is a literature that explores how the judicial, the constitutional courts, Supreme Courts settle conflict of attributions between the two levels of government. So that part of the authority boundaries, in a way, are already quite exploited, but the geographical boundaries and the tensions that emerge because of these boundaries is perhaps a little bit less explored.
Bem, quando nós falamos sobre federalismo, nós temos que discutir exatamente esse elemento relativo ao que é escasso na discussão comparativa, que é exatamente, primeiro, se outras unidades que não os estados ou as províncias, os cantões, os Länder, podem ou não ser levadas em consideração na matéria federalista. E, em segundo lugar, se essas unidades menores têm potencial para terem um status constitucional. Né? Além disso, quando se fala em federalismo, a gente tem que lembrar que existem dois tipos de fronteiras. Fronteiras físicas ou geográficas, por exemplo, e fronteiras de autoridade, ou fronteiras que são estabelecidas pela Constituição a distribuir a autoridade. O importante é entender que existem relações entre essas duas fronteiras. E que, embora a questão da distribuição da autoridade entre autoridades federais e locais esteja mais ou menos resolvida, por exemplo, a questão, ou seja, mais estudada, como, por exemplo, a questão de conflitos entre a autoridade federal e as autoridades locais, a segunda questão, que está fortemente interrelacionada com essa, não é objeto de uma atenção particular, que são e ambas as dimensões, tanto a dos limites ou das fronteiras físicas, quanto das fronteiras jurídicas, estão interrelacionadas e não podem ser completamente compreendidas uma sem a outra.
Okay, so going back to the core of the question, is it true that not much discussion has occurred on units in federalism theory and constitutional law theory? So my argument is that the way in which federal systems or a federation has emerged tells a lot about the unit question, in a way answers at least partially this unit question. And I make the distinction between coming together and holding together federal systems. Some people call aggregative federalism and federalism by disaggregation. But regardless of the expression that we use, I will stick to holding together and coming together. In coming together federations, this is basically the older way in that federal systems have emerged. The United States, Canada, Australia have emerged in this way. So previously independent states, previously independent units that at some point decided to come together under a federal constitution to form a new entity that is the federal state. Now, under this scheme, although other units, like for example local governments, existed, well, they lacked constitutional status because they did not have any pre-existing sovereignty. Now, for such older federations, and again, the US, Canada, Australia, now the units, the entities that existed at the time the federation was formed are still the same, even after hundreds of years. Nothing has really much changed. And as Levy, that I mentioned before, claimed, in such scenario, most existing entities are actually too few or too large or too tightly associated with ethnocultural or linguistic divides, too rigidly fixed. And so they lack, in a way, flexibility, and they do not favor mobility and competition among units. According to Levy, units should favor competition. They should be flexible enough to favor exchange of people and a certain dynamics between all of them. But in these older federations, not much can be done. Some of these units, and I think particularly of some Canadian provinces or some Australian states, these are really so large and not very numerous, and certainly they do not favor mobility or competition.
Bem, para a gente entender essa questão da unidade, é importante, tanto no ponto de vista da teoria federal quanto da teoria constitucional, é importante observar que o modo como se origina uma federação tem um alto poder explicativo. Ou seja, se a federação ela é uma federação formada por agregação ou por segregação, isso vai ser relevante ao explicar ou tentar compreender a questão da unidade. Ou seja, federações clássicas, como aquelas que foram formadas a partir de estados que antes eram soberanos e passam a formar um novo estado federal, como é o caso clássico dos Estados Unidos e da Suíça, né, que aqui eu chamo de federações formadas por um vir para perto ou vir para junto. Nós temos pouco espaço para as unidades locais, municípios, condados, etc., exatamente porque quem tem um papel mais relevante são exatamente as unidades principais, que são os estados, né? E existem alguns outros elementos que podem influenciar nisso, como Levy mesmo evidencia, por exemplo, serem muito poucos os estados, ou serem muito fracos, ou seja, se não houver uma competição significativa entre as entidades da federação, isso também joga um papel. Mas a tendência é que nessas federações chamadas de centrípetas, ou por agregação, a tendência é que as unidades as unidades locais não tenham um papel significativo. Okay,
But coming together federations stand in contrast with holding together federal systems. Here, as we know, the opposite happens. So we have a previously unitary state that progressively devolves powers to the subunits. This is done for many reasons. It could be to control centrifugal forces, it could be to tame secessionist aspirations, or to deal with all sorts of internal divides. But holding together federations are becoming more common now, so they are the more common form of forming a federal system. And in this specific scenario, it is not unusual to see the entrenchment of, in the constitution, of additional layers of government. So the municipal sphere, the urban sphere. So no, we don't have necessarily only 2 levels of government, but we have 3, 4. So there is a little bit more of creativity. So smaller units, units that are not the Westphalian state size type of unit, exist in these more recent federal systems. And you know, we can think of many examples in this sense. The Italian constitution is telling in this regard. As you might know already, in Italy, we have 5 different levels of government that are recognized by the constitution. So regions and the state as the main actors, the main players, but then we have provinces, we have municipalities, and then we have also metropolitan cities. The Spanish autonomic system has a similar arrangement. The state, the autonomous communities, the provinces, and the municipalities. In Germany, in Switzerland, even if the main federal players are still the state and cantons and Länder, but yet municipalities, communes are considered important actors in the federation, and their autonomy is protected by the constitution. And I think also in Brazil there are similar arrangements with the union, the federation composed of the union, the states, the federal district, and the municipalities. And I think Argentina also has something similar. So, of course, there are many other examples that we can think of, but also, besides federal systems, I was thinking about France. Now, in France is certainly not a decentralized state. It's actually considered the archetypal unitary state. But there has been a discussion, a reasoning in France, at least since the Napoleonic times, about the formation of these administrative départements, the departments, the districts, administrative districts. And the creation of these districts had to follow specific rules. So the boundaries of these districts had to follow specific rules. So they should not be too linked to a certain specific cultural identity, because the idea was to create a more homogeneous nation. But most importantly, within these departments, each settlement had to be exactly at 1 day's distance from the main city, in order to make sure that a certain control of the territory was guaranteed.
Bem, no que diz respeito às holding together federations, ou seja, essas federações surgidas por descentralização ou segregação, onde um Estado unitário acaba concedendo autonomia para os entes subnacionais, primeiro, elas são mais comuns atualmente do que foram no passado. No passado eram mais comuns as federações por agregação e não por segregação. Segundo, e nesses novos tipos de federação, é muito mais comum que na Constituição não se trate apenas dos estados ou dos Länder, dos cantões, mas se trate também dos municípios, ou seja, é comum que haja normas relativas à autonomia dos municípios ou das cidades, dos condados, das entidades locais, protegidas, né, com normas constitucionais que protegem a autonomia dessas entidades locais. Em muitos casos se encontram 3, 4 ou até mais níveis de governo na própria Constituição. É o caso, abrangendo, portanto, essas unidades menores, né, que não se encaixam perfeitamente no sistema westphaliano. É o caso evidente da Itália, em que existem não apenas as regiões, mas também existem as províncias, as cidades metropolitanas e os próprios comunes, os próprios municípios, mas também da Espanha, que tem um arranjo semelhante, em que existe a autonomia das comunidades autônomas e também das províncias e outros níveis de governo, e o caso da Alemanha, o caso da Suíça, e mesmo se nós pensamos em algumas situações não tão óbvias, como, por exemplo, a França, que é um Estado unitário considerado centralizado, o arquétipo do Estado unitário, na atualidade, existe uma discussão importante a respeito dessa questão, por exemplo, no que diz respeito à divisão de competências dos departamentos, né, ou departement, que são as divisões supostamente apenas administrativas do território francês. Então, existem algumas questões que fazem com que nessas federações surgidas por desagregação, a questão das unidades, ou as unidades menores, apareçam com a proteção constitucional com mais frequência.
And about the formation of units, let me go back to the Italian example, because it is in a way interesting to the discussion, I think. So presently, the 20 regions that we have, they are all listed in Article 131 of the Constitution. They have been created by the Constituent Assembly. So they have been created basically in 1947, 48, when the present Constitution was passed. And these regions were actually created based on statistical districts that had been elaborated back in the 1800s. Now, there is the possibility, according to the Constitution, to change the boundaries of these regions, and there is also the possibility under the Constitution to create new regions, as long as there are at least 1 million people within the newly formed region. And in fact, there have been the creation of additional regions since the Constitution was passed. Now, interesting enough, these regions, these constitutionally recognized regions, do not necessarily coincide with historical regions. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Italy and with the various Italian regions, but there are parts of Italy, for example, I don't know, Monferrato in Piemonte, Irpinia in southern Italy, Sannio in southern Italy. These are all historical territories, historical regions, but they do not have a constitutionally recognized boundaries, because when the regions were drawn, they thought that the historical territories were not big enough for constitutional purposes. They were smaller than the statistical districts. And so they thought it was not a good idea to create regions that were that small. Also, with provinces, provinces are also, we have now more than 100 provinces in Italy. Some of them coincided with the civitates of ancient Roman times, but most of them were also drawn based on the model, on the French model that I was telling you before. So the French model had lots of influence in pre-unitary Italy because of proximity regions. So they were drawn based on the need to keep all the territory under control. So there is this discussion, and also about the metropolitan cities. As I said, they are now entrenched in the Constitution. But in Italy, at least since the 1960s, there is a debate, at least at the level of scholars and in books and articles, about whether cities should have their unit status of their own in light of the urbanization and the socioeconomic importance of cities.
Ok. A Itália, com as suas atuais 20 regiões, que foram criadas na Constituinte de 47 a 48, essas regiões, elas não correspondem necessariamente a regiões históricas. Elas eram baseadas, na verdade, em regiões estatísticas ou regiões baseadas no censo, ou seja, por volta que já existiam no século XIX. E também é possível a sua alteração, né? Então, essas regiões não coincidem necessariamente com unidades com existência histórica pré-existente. Muitas dessas unidades que existem, por exemplo, em Piemonte, regiões que têm uma característica histórica própria, não têm Constituição porque foram consideradas como muito pequenas para serem dotadas de status constitucionais, ou seja, não eram grandes o suficiente para serem consideradas no arranjo, na organização territorial da Itália, feita pela Constituinte entre 47 e 48. E, basicamente, as províncias italianas seguem mais ou menos o mesmo modelo, ou seja, não tem necessariamente correspondência com comunidades historicamente, culturalmente pré-existentes, né, mas muito mais baseadas em elementos demográficos. Né? A Itália, nesse particular, seguiu muito de perto o modelo francês, ou seja, basicamente organizou a sua organização territorial com base na ideia de ocupar e manter o controle sobre todo o território. Desde os anos 60 do século XX, existe um debate entre acadêmicos na Itália exatamente sobre a questão da conveniência ou não, por exemplo, das regiões metropolitanas terem, como tem hoje na Constituição italiana, status constitucional.
And besides these practical examples, mainly from Italy, there is at least one federalism scholar, Kenneth Weir, who already in 1949, in his book, Federal Government, he was trying to engage with this unit question. And he tried to spell out what he believed were the basic features of a federated unit. So for him, an ideal unit in a federal system should have at least four characteristics, four features. So it should be not too powerful compared to the other units, so as not to overrule the other units or bend the will of the government towards themselves. It should not be too large or too small, so it should have like the ideal territorial size. It should have a third enough sufficient economic resources. And finally, it should have the right size in terms of population, because if the population was too small, it was not capable to supply enough workforce. Now, of course, as I said, Kenneth Weir was writing all this in 1949, and we can agree that saying that a unit should be not too large or not too small or not enough populated is very relative, because what is big and what is small depends on the specific context. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there has been this type of reasoning on units size and population. So, and I conclude this section going back to the claim made by Herschel that there is no real discussion about units. Well, it's a claim that, in my opinion, needs to be a little bit refined, because I think it tells only part of the story. It tells only perhaps the story of the Anglo-American type of federal systems that have emerged. Certainly, however, I agree with him. I think that there is still room for very interesting comparative perspectives and comparative discussions on the unit. And so I think that engaging more in this debate at comparative level would be very useful.
Em 1945 já existia um acadêmico que, num escrito chamado Sobre o Governo Federal, abordava esse problema da unidade, né, da unidade federativa ou da unidade federada, né. Esse acadêmico sustentava que uma unidade federada tinha que ter pelo menos 4 características. Não poderia ser muito poderosa, porque a tendência dela seria concentrar os poderes ou ultrapassar as demais unidades federadas. Não poderia ser muito grande ou muito pequena, teria que ter um tamanho ideal, digamos, o que é algo relativo, porque depende da realidade de cada país. Teria que ter recursos econômicos suficientes para se manter, para desenvolver as suas atividades, e, além disso, teria que ter também uma população, um tamanho de população suficiente para não ter dificuldades. É evidente que alguns desses aspectos são interessantes, são importantes, e se pode concordar que tem que ter uma população, por exemplo, ou uma autossuficiência econômica para que seja considerada uma unidade subnacional viável, né? Por outro lado, esse ponto que nós levantamos desde o começo da fala de que não se leva em consideração as unidades subnacionais que não estão em conformidade com o modelo de Westfália, tem que ser refinado, porque isso se apresenta verdadeiro mais para a tradição americana do que para a tradição europeia. Ao que parece, na Europa houve alguma discussão e alguma deliberação no sentido de quais unidades deveriam ou não ser consideradas como capazes de ter um nível de proteção constitucional. De qualquer forma, apesar disso, ainda existe muito espaço para pesquisas comparativas no que diz respeito a essa questão das unidades subnacionais menores.
And so one of the next question that we can ask and that would invite, I think, interesting comparative perspectives is the following. So which other territorial entities, which other territorial areas might have the capacity to become federated units? So regardless of whether we agree or not with Rand Herschel that we need to discuss more about units, the next question that we can ask is what are other potential areas or territories or entities that can be upgraded to the unit status? Or another way to frame the question is, do federal units as they currently exist in federations or that are traditionally conceived, do they succeed in addressing the most pressing contemporary challenges, or do we need to think about other units? So it's the same question phrased in different ways.
Bem, a próxima questão que nós temos que enfrentar é exatamente essa. Quais seriam as outras entidades territoriais distintas daquelas que classicamente são introduzidas ou são reconhecidas dentro de um Estado federal, teriam ou deveriam ter a capacidade de ser reconhecidas como unidades federadas, ou seja, poderiam ter esse status de unidade federada ou ter esse upgrade para unidades federadas. Basicamente, essa é a segunda questão que nós temos que enfrentar.
So in the next part of my paper, I identify three different entities or three different territorial entities that usually fall outside of the unit analysis. So they are not Westphalian state size, to quote Herschel. And as such, they currently don't have a recognized status as federal subjects or as constitutional subjects. Now, this is not a closed list, of course. It serves only as an illustrative purpose. And so if you can think of other examples, I would be very interested in including and reflecting on other examples. And also, I agree that perhaps not all the three examples that I'm going to give would apply to all federal systems. So the three examples that I discuss are basically cities, of course. The second is Aboriginal communities, First Nations, indigenous communities. And the third refers to specific patterns of economic regionalism and natural resources distribution. So I describe each of them quite in detail in the paper, and I try to explain why it would be interesting to take into account these entities. The main reason why I look at these three examples is for purposes of reconciliation of diversity and social cohesion, and to better address some specific tensions, some specific problems.
Bem, no que diz respeito a essa questão, então, específica sobre quais as entidades territoriais que poderiam ser candidatas a esse upgrade constitucional, ou seja, fazerem parte da federação de um ponto de vista constitucional, é possível ilustrar, sem pretensão de exaustão, três diferentes entidades territoriais que não se encaixam no modelo westphaliano. Primeiro, obviamente, as cidades, não é? Em segundo lugar, comunidades aborígenes, indígenas, etc., e, em terceiro lugar, também regiões que têm padrões específicos de distribuição de recursos naturais, que seriam relevantes para, eventualmente, levar em consideração nessa distribuição da autoridade ou da autonomia. Isso sem excluir outras possibilidades, e a gente poderia discutir, eu gostaria de ouvir outras possibilidades de entidades que poderiam ser eventualmente levadas em consideração para fins de organização federal.
So briefly, cities. A lot has been written about cities, but the fact is that urbanization in these past few decades has become one of the most pressing challenges. And particularly, we saw the emergence of mega cities, of big cities, particularly in the global south. Now, this urbanization has put so much pressure on cities, and this has often, so cities have often found themselves without enough powers, without enough resources to provide adequate services and infrastructures to all. And furthermore, here I really build on what Ron Herschel says. The levels of inequality that exists between within the same city, between the neighborhoods, can sometimes be very similar to the inequalities that exist within richer and poorer areas at the level of the federation. I was reading an example that he was offering about São Paulo in Brazil. It's very impressive, because he says that he compares different suburbs within São Paulo, so the Jardim Paulista, the Cidade Tiradentes, Anhanguera, and the Jardim Angela. And he says that between these neighborhoods, so within basically 15 kilometers, individuals live on average 24 years less than the residents of the richer neighborhoods. So 79.8 was the average age in the Jardim Paulista, and 56 years in the Anhanguera neighborhood. So, I mean, these are shocking figures, these are shocking numbers. But then, of course, cities also, so this is the so-called the center-periphery type of divide, but we also have the urban and rural type of divide, particularly in the global south. So the difficulties in accessing basic services, as moving away from the city centers, access to some basic services can become really a problem. And so there has been this discussion in this past few years whether cities should become federal units or constitutional units on their own, so as to provide them with the tools, the practical tools to face more efficiently all these problems that urbanization has brought with it.
Bem, voltando à questão das cidades, né, primeiramente abordando a questão das cidades, é evidente que a urbanização impôs alguns dos maiores desafios contemporâneos, especialmente com o fenômeno das megacidades e das grandes cidades. Né? Então, aqui, retomando a partir de Herschel, né, nós percebemos exatamente isso, que as cidades precisam ter poderes suficientes e recursos suficientes para enfrentar os desafios que elas têm. E hoje, em função desse status constitucional que lhes falta, muitas vezes, elas não possuem esses poderes e esses recursos. Além disso, como Herschel aponta, existe uma desigualdade interna dentro das cidades que não é diferente da desigualdade que existe entre outras unidades federativas, como os estados, por exemplo. Ele cita vários exemplos a partir, por exemplo, da cidade de São Paulo, né, que demonstra que com poucos quilômetros de distância as expectativas de vida são muito diferentes, né, de uma região para outra da cidade, ou entre o centro e a periferia, ou regiões nobres e a periferia. Né? Então, isso de fato evidencia que os problemas que as grandes cidades enfrentam, especialmente, são grandes, notadamente no hemisfério sul. Né? Outros problemas, como, por exemplo, a dificuldade de acessar serviços básicos, né? fazem com que a gente reflita exatamente sobre a conveniência de, eventualmente, incluir as cidades como unidades federais para que elas sejam dotadas das ferramentas necessárias para enfrentar os desafios que se colocam para elas na atualidade.
Regarding Aboriginal, Indigenous, or First Nation communities, in many federations, like Australia, like Canada, the US as well, and I think also in Latin America, in South America, this is what I call an open wound. Because Aboriginal communities, Indigenous affairs are almost always under the exclusive federal control, the control of the federal government, but this rarely leaves these communities in a position to fully administer their affairs. The current arrangements that are in place contribute to the disruption of social cohesion, affects the enjoyment of basic rights, because Indigenous communities are often left at the margins of societies, and the attempts to mend the relationships with the central government or even with the other existing subunits has often failed. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and if I'm mistaken, please correct me, but I think that the failed constitutional proposal in Chile that was recently rejected by referendum provided for the creation of regions that whose boundaries would follow the Aboriginal, some Aboriginal communities, and I think that so that Aboriginal communities could have their own units. Now, I think that this would have been an interesting model example to follow, but as far as I know, at least in the main federations that I follow, this is not, the situation is very different.
No que diz respeito ao segundo elemento, que seriam as comunidades originárias, existem alguns casos, os mais evidentes são os Estados Unidos, a Austrália e o Canadá, em que existem alguns direitos dessas comunidades originárias e alguma autonomia assegurada, seja em nível constitucional, seja pela legislação. No entanto, essas comunidades, em geral, elas recaem, via de regra, sob controle ou tutela, algum tipo de tutela do governo federal. De modo que é difícil uma efetiva, uma total autonomia dessas comunidades para que elas possam se auto-administrar. E não raramente elas são deixadas à margem, sem ter a devida observância dos seus direitos, né? Salvo engano, a Constituição do Chile, que acabou de ser rejeitada no referendo, ela estabelecia algumas das regiões exatamente com fronteiras baseadas nessas comunidades tradicionais. Isso não é uma tendência no constitucionalismo atual, mas a gente pode refletir exatamente sobre a conveniência de se elevar essas comunidades também a um status constitucional de ente da federação.
And finally, the third example is that of economic regionalism, and I treat that together with the natural resources distributions, because they have a similar dynamics. They are part of the same phenomenon. Basically, what I mean by economic regionalism, I mean that phenomenon that is based on the successful performance, economic performance of certain areas of a given state, but also on the presence of a specific industrial clusters. Think about, I don't know, the Silicon Valley in California. Think about the Ruhr industrial district cluster in Germany. Now, the presence of such economically richer territories is not necessarily a problem. It's not a problem per se, but it becomes a problem when a political dimension is added to the economic dimension. In other words, when the successful economic performance is coupled with a strong political performance, because it is at that point that political parties may start to mobilize, they may start claiming more powers for that specific territory, thus generating all sorts of tensions, all sorts of problems, because these claims for more powers can lead to exit threats that exacerbate or the relationships, the horizontal and vertical relationships. And at the same time, they impact interregional solidarity. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed. And I just add here the problem of natural resources distributions, because it's very similar. In some states, natural resources are often distributed unevenly among territories, and this has emerged as a problem, particularly in post-colonial, post-war contexts. Nigeria is a very famous example, with the presence of oil in a specific area, the Delta Niger Delta area. And often this ownership or disputes over ownership of resources is interlaced with ethnic divisions. And this exacerbates and creates tensions, because territories where these natural resources exist, they feel exploited by the central government. They feel that the central government uses the revenues coming from the natural resources to the detriment of the resource-producing territory. So economic regionalism and natural resource distributions can be elements of fragmentation that I think should be taken into account when distributing powers and when drawing also unit boundaries.
No que diz respeito à terceira dimensão, nós tocamos na questão, então, do regionalismo econômico. O que eu quero dizer com regionalismo econômico? É basicamente naquele que é baseado exatamente na dinâmica ou no grau de sucesso econômico de certas regiões. Isso em si não é um problema, mas passa a ser um problema quando começa a afetar questões políticas. Por exemplo, quando certas regiões que são bem-sucedidas economicamente, pensem, por exemplo, no Silicon Valley ou outros lugares em que existe um grande desenvolvimento tecnológico ou econômico, né, começa a existir, por exemplo, tensões ou problemas ou exigências de um maior controle ou disputas entre grupos políticos pelo controle dessas regiões, ou ainda exigências de uma maior autonomia, um maior poder por essas regiões. Isso pode gerar problemas que podem ser bastante sérios, né? Tendências ao autonomismo, até mesmo secessionismo, problemas que envolvem as relações intergovernamentais, além do impacto negativo que as desigualdades podem ter sobre a solidariedade territorial. Então, temos vários problemas nesse sentido, em particular nos estados pós-coloniais, como, por exemplo, a Nigéria, ou estados pós-guerra, né? Além disso, é comum que nesses contextos surjam disputas a respeito da propriedade dos recursos econômicos, não é? Além de outros problemas políticos que podem ser graves, como, por exemplo, a sensação de exploração pelo governo central, né? Por parte das regiões que têm esses recursos econômicos. E essas disputas sobre a propriedade de recursos naturais, elas frequentemente estão correlacionadas com questões étnicas, envolvendo, por exemplo, diferentes grupos étnicos, e isso pode ser um problema também.
So in the three examples that I have just illustrated, the territorial entities that I consider do not coincide with institutional federal units, but they occupy either a smaller portion of the unit, like, for example, in the case of cities or some of regional communities, or they can even transcend the unit boundaries, as is the case with natural resources. But the point is that these territories are not always placed in a position to respond to the local tensions that emerge, because they don't have the power to do so. And since they are invisible units, they are limited in the way they can respond to certain challenges. So I basically invite, in a way, to rethink geopolitical authority boundaries in such a way that takes into account not only pre-existing sovereignty, as is or as was the case with the Westphalian state model, or just languages or ethnicity, but also patterns of economic and natural resources distribution, urban, rural, center, periphery divides, and aboriginal claims.
Bem, concluindo esse aspecto, nos três exemplos dados, nós percebemos que essas entidades territoriais não são coincidentes com a divisão institucional da autoridade ou do poder. Elas podem ser menores ou maiores, como, por exemplo, no caso da questão envolvendo os recursos econômicos, né? E o fato é que elas nem sempre contam com os recursos necessários para responder aos desafios que se colocam a elas por força dessas tensões ou desses problemas que foram mencionados. Em um certo sentido, tratam-se de unidades invisíveis e unidades limitadas. Limitadas porque não são capazes exatamente, não dispõem dos recursos necessários para responder a esses desafios. De modo que nós somos convidados a repensar essas fronteiras geopolíticas para incluir nelas, talvez, questões envolvendo, por exemplo, essa questão dos povos originários ou do desenvolvimento econômico.
So I don't know how much time we have left, but I just want to conclude with the third and final part of the paper, which is the part where I have perhaps more questions than answers. But I basically think that exploring the unit question in this way also offers an opportunity to contribute to some theoretical discussions in constitutional law. Particularly, I consider how reflecting on units has the potential to enrich the discussion on some fundamental constitutional law principles, such as sovereignty, such as constituent power, but also on doctrines, constitutional doctrines such as constitutional identity. In fact, in spite of the attractiveness, increasing attractiveness of federalism as a form of governance, when we think about constitutional principles as they are elaborated in constitutional theory, usually theorists take the unitary state as the basis for their analysis. And in this way, they disregard basically the conceptual complexities that exist in a multi-level system, in a composite state. And this is particularly true with, for example, sovereignty. So there has been in the past this debate whether sovereignty could be split or not. We have different positions. The Anglo-Saxon position says that it can be split. The European position says that it cannot be split. But regardless, this is like the old debate. But whether we agree, for example, on the fact that cities can become units, or that Aboriginal states, Aboriginal people, could have their own units, then how can we define, how can we describe their sovereignty? Is the sovereignty that Aboriginal communities have the same type of sovereignty as we understand in our own tradition, for example? Can we say that cities might have the same type of sovereignty as the other subunits? So these are questions for which I don't have answers, but that are, triggering my curiosity. And the same is true with constituent power. To what extent constituent power is a very continental European, Latin American kind of concept that the Anglo-Saxon tradition doesn't really understand, or not in the same way as us. But if, again, we agree on the unit status of cities or Aboriginal communities, to what extent would they enjoy also constituent power? Would it be the same type of constituent power as the central or the federal government? Now, this type of questions are not normally raised by theorists. And I conclude also with the example of, and perhaps we can talk more, but I conclude with the example of constitutional identity. There is a revival on this doctrine also in Europe, in North American literature. It's a fascinating concept, although it is perhaps a little bit abstract. But constituent power also might lead to the development of a certain constitutional identity at the subnational level, something that has not been really explored. There is a little bit of discussion, not so much in legal scholarship, perhaps more in political science or other areas of scholarship, on city identity. so the identity of city, but how would look like the potential constitutional identity of cities. So there are other examples that I can make, but I don't want to take all the time. But I think that reflecting on the unit question also leads to the possibility to reflect also on these broad theoretical issues, taking into account the subnational level and adding that to the debate. Of course, it also entails discussing issues of representation of these new units at the central level and all that. But I think that the theoretical aspects of the unit question are very important. So I stop here and I thank you for the attention.
A terceira, por fim, já indo para a terceira parte final da minha fala, eu evidencio exatamente isso. Quais são os aspectos que a gente pode explorar, quais são os aspectos que a gente pode refletir a respeito dessa questão das unidades que devem ser levadas em consideração, incluídas dentro da federação, não é? E eu chamo a atenção para o fato de que essa reflexão ela tem impacto também em conceitos tradicionais da teoria constitucional, da teoria do federalismo, que foram muitas vezes formulados pensando no Estado unitário e que talvez não sirvam perfeitamente em estados complexos, estados compostos de unidades menores. Basta pensar, por exemplo, na questão da soberania. A soberania para o Estado unitário tem um significado que pode ser completamente diferente ou pode ter impactos muito diferentes em um Estado composto, um Estado que tem subunidades autônomas, estados ou cantões ou províncias ou länder autônomos, não é? Outros conceitos, como, por exemplo, a própria soberania, né? Se a gente pensa, por exemplo, na soberania ou na autonomia de comunidades autônomas, de comunidades aborígenes, ou de, por exemplo, de cidades, né? Essa soberania ou essa autonomia é do mesmo tipo que a do Estado, tal como classicamente concebida, ou é um outro tipo de autonomia ou soberania, né? E alguns outros conceitos, né, no que diz respeito, por exemplo, ao poder constituinte ou ao próprio princípio da identidade da Constituição, que está sofrendo um revival em tempos atuais e que, de fato, pode ter impactos bastante significativos a partir dessa discussão de quais são as unidades, né, quais são as unidades que são levadas em consideração dentro desses estados federais. E observo que essas discussões não têm só impactos práticos, mas também têm impactos teoréticos, ou seja, é importante também do ponto de vista da teoria que nós reflitamos a respeito dessa questão de qual é a unidade territorial que nós vamos levar em consideração em análise. Mas encerro por aqui, agradeço a presença. Professor, thank you so much. This is a so interesting subject. I am reflecting. It was some time about this. And Brazilian Federation have some interesting innovations in this aspect. I think we can discuss this better now along our discussion. I have a paper that discusses exactly this point. What's if there is a municipal constitutionalism in Brazil, and what are the arguments in favor or con this thesis that is a thesis that is rejected in Brazil by the Supreme Court and by the major literature, legal literature dominant. But I think that there are so many questions to respond still. Then thank you so much again for your generosity. And now I will open the discussion. Vou passar a palavra para o Christian Altavija. Fique à vontade, meu amigo, para fazer as considerações que você entender apropriadas e as questões aí a gente fazer a nossa discussão. Agradeço mais uma vez a sua presença. E com a palavra, professor Christian Altavija.
Well, thank you very much, Luis. Thank you very much, Erika, for this very interesting discussion. I found very interesting your proposal to consider new federated unit into consideration because, first of all, I think is that bring a new, a refreshed vision of what is or what we understand for federalism. And I found very interesting this proposal to analyze these three different entities you mentioned. You mentioned as a possible federated unit, like cities, Aboriginal communities, and these specific regions, economic regions. First, like regarding the Aboriginal communities, I think in Latin America you will find a very interesting cases in very traditional unitary countries like Ecuador, Bolivia, or Colombia, that they're in their new constitutions they recognize what they call Aboriginal municipalities. So they have a special autonomy, and of course they are not federated unit because this is a unitary model state, very Westphalian model state. They never decentralized even to the regional level. The only one was Chile with this new proposed constitution. What it was rejected by the Chilean population. But I think it's a very, very interesting case to analyze these Aboriginal communities. The 1994 Argentine Constitution, the reform of the Constitution in 1994, there is a special disposition in this new text that recognize the pre-existing indigenous people. And among other things, the Congress has to recognize the legal capacity of these Aboriginal communities to have a community possession of lands, but it doesn't say any longer than that. So it could be a case to take into consideration to further develops and to, for instance, to go for a municipal or Aboriginal municipality system like in our neighbor countries. Indeed, one province in Argentina has recognize a municipal, an Aboriginal municipality, the Ranquel community, which is a traditional Aboriginal community in the province of San Luis. And first of all, we need to take into account that in the Argentine federal system, the municipal level is a provincial competence. So it's up to the provinces to regulate the municipal system. But the 1994 Constitution incorporated a new article stating that the municipal level should be guaranteed autonomy, full autonomy in the political, economic, and in the financial aspect of autonomy. So provinces has to regulate the municipal levels, but they have this national constitutional obligation to recognize an autonomous cities. And also the 1994 constitutional reform recognized the competence of the provinces to set up regions for the economic and social development. And this is a topic I link with I think was the second point of your presentation, or the first one, when you talk about the socio-economic asymmetries, and the Argentine Federation is a very highly asymmetric federation in terms of socio-economic indicators. We have a very, very poor and underdeveloped provinces, and we have a very, very rich provinces, and this is very linked to the process of the creation of the Argentine Federation. Is a typical example of a coming together federation. The 14 provinces declared their independence to Spain, and then 40 years after this declaration of independence, they finally agreed to create a new state, and in the federal under the federal system. But since then, the northern provinces, which were very rich in the colonial era, because they were very close to Lima, which was the most important city, the Spanish colonial city in South America. So they closeness to the Lima, which was the huge city and the most rich city, the richest city in Latin America. This closeness benefited the northern region of the country. But when we declare our independence, there was a shift in the economic process, and Buenos Aires became the center of the economic process, and especially focused to the relation with Europe. So decade after decades and century after centuries, the northern region was getting even poor regions. And now, currently, federalism, and that is a topic that I am actually studying, and I have a paper on this topic regarding socioeconomic asymmetries, is that the federalism, at least in the economic aspect, has not contributed to reduce this asymmetry. On the contrary, it has more incentives for the poor provinces to remain poor because they receive much more money without any obligation to spend this money. So there are some special institutional arrangement which gave some negative incentive to the northern provinces to spend their monies in basic services like health or education or housing. So they remain poor, and despite the very strong redistributive effects of the federal transfer. So, well, those are some of the notes I have been taking during your presentation regarding the Latin American and the Argentine experience. What it may be useful for your article. I think that these three specific territorial entities you mentioned is a new topic to keep in mind, not only for new form of federation, but also to think and to rethink what we understand as a federal arrangement. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Christian. Professor Arban, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Christian. That was extremely helpful. I actually like very much what you say at the end and you say at the beginning. I think, it could be a new way also to rethink what we mean by federalism. So definitely this is so true. And thank you for the examples that you mentioned from Argentina and from also other Latin American countries like unitary states regarding the Aboriginal I don't know anything about that, but if you have, but it seems like very pertinent to my work. So perhaps maybe we can exchange some articles later, because it would be very interesting to learn more. So thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you again for both of you. I will give the word to Marcelo Labanca, but I need to make a little comment. I was thinking about our constitution, because in Brazil we have a constitution that defines our federation like the union, between union, federal union, states, federal district, that is similar to a state, and municipalities. Then we have a singular kind of federation that I called neo-federalism, that includes the local government in the federal arrangement. And the most important, with very similar degrees of autonomy and guarantees that the other levels. Then when we compare the autonomy and the guarantees of autonomy of municipal governments with the state governments and federal district governments, it's very similar. I also applied the Patricia Popelier theoretic approach to them, and the score is very similar. Then it's interesting because it seems, it's my thesis in an unpublished work, that in Brazil we have the cities and the municipal government like a part of a federation, and this make me think about our federation in this perspective. I think that Brazilian Federation is a federation of federations. We have 26 states that are, each one of them, a federation of municipalities. And this is a declarance of our federal constitution. Then the status of the municipal government in Brazil, or the cities in Brazil, is totally different from the status, for example, in the United States, that there are Dillon rule states and home rule states. We are all home rule states. I have a hypothesis that we received the American model of local government from United States through two state constitutions, Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina state constitutions, in the Constituent Assembly that have place between 1986 and 88, that create or constitution, the Brazilian Constitution of 1988. We federalized this model. Then we have a Brazilian home rule that involves all the 26 states, except only the federal district, that the federal constitution forbidden the division in cities and local administrations. Then it's very interesting, and I think that your speech was very valuable to our reflections. Thank you again. But we have a very similar federation, and I know, Christian, that in Argentina, after the 1994 reform, you will have one city that is Buenos Aires that has a constitution, and the same is true for Mexico City that has a constitution. Then a question that I have to Professor Arban is, what is the importance to us to understand this constitutional status of municipalities of these cities that has constitutions, like Buenos Aires or like Ciudad de México? Thank you so much, Professor.
No, thank you so much also for the Brazilian example, and definitely the Mexico City and Buenos Aires. Yes, I knew that they had this state status and they have their own constitution, so it could be useful to look at these two examples also to reflect on perhaps constituent power and constitutional identity and all that. Although they are recent, they have been recently created, so probably it's maybe too early. But definitely they could be very good tests or empirical examples to reflect on these principles.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Sorry, Luis, thank you for mentioning that. I forgot to mention that in 1994, a new federated unit was created, and it is the autonomous city of Buenos Aires with its own statute or constitution. And the interesting thing is that the constitution makers have explicitly differentiated Buenos Aires from the rest of the provinces. Each time that the constitution mentioned the provinces, also mentioned the city of Buenos Aires. And there are some dispositions in which Buenos Aires has its own regime, different from the provinces. So it's not the same as the other provinces. It has its special status. It's an autonomous city. And I think it's a very interesting case to analyze. I think there are some federal countries like Germany. They have also some autonomous cities. Spain has two autonomous cities, like Melilla and the other one I don't remember
Ceuta,
and
yeah.
Melilla. And also I was thinking while you were speaking that, for instance, in Switzerland there are cantons that are only a city, like Basel or Geneva. They are a canton like the rest of the canton, with the same powers and the same statute, but they are also a city, only a city, but they are treated like another canton, right? So I think it's very interesting.
Yes, no, absolutely. You're right. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Marcelo Labanca, please. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Luis, for this invitation, so I can hear and learn more with Erika Arban about federalism and about the unit question. Erika, here I was thinking about how we became a federation here in Brazil, and there is a I think how can I say this? There is a mistake, a very common mistake about federalism by aggregation or segregation, because we a century ago, more or less, not 2 centuries, this year like in September now, we had 2 centuries of our independence. And when we became independent from Portugal, we had a monarchy, like an imperial state. Brazil is very, it's very big, and this name imperial, it was Império Brasileiro. It was like I think it was like to show like how we were strong about being one, because the name imperial state, like Rome, it seems to have a, how can I say this in English, a reference about this mighty state, this mighty imperial state. So to not have succession and it was almost 80 years, I think, in this imperial state. No, it's 80 years, 22. Yeah, well, almost 80 years. Please correct me, Luis, if I'm wrong about the time. The time. Yeah.
You're not.
So we had a so long time being an imperial monarch with a monarchy, and in 1889, so we became a republic, a federative republic. And why I'm saying that it's like a common mistake with the researchers, federal researchers, because what they view, it's like we were only one thing, like a unitary state. So after 1889, we became a federative state. But in the imperial state, we had there, we can affirm that we had already federalism. We were not a federal state, we were an imperial state, but we had federalism or federalisms, because we had like legislative powers in we had units without autonomy, but with some sort of legislative powers, and with sharing competencies, or in the imperial constitution, you know, with the repetition of competence, la ripartizione delle competenze. And we can say that we had there a federalism in an imperial state. So let's see how we became a federalism, or a federal state. If you see, can I share my screen, Luis, just for a while?
For sure, Marcelo.
Yeah, let me share here. If we see, like almost 5 centuries ago, at the beginning of everything, like in Brazil, when Portugal was here for the first time, so we had a division, a territorial division that was called the capitane's hereditary. How can I call this in English? Like this.
I think you can't, Marcelo. Capitanias hereditárias. There was
capitanias hereditárias. Yeah, there was like a division of the land was divided, and from Portugal, and they gave this land for some guys in Portugal to become here the chief of the land, something like this. And it was hereditary because it becomes the land from son from father to son, and so on. And if you see the map, the Brazilian map of the capitanes, hereditary capitanes, and if you see now our map, our Brazilian map, now it's almost not every, but almost the same. You see here, Pernambuco is my state. And you see here, I don't know if you are seeing already. This is here Pernambuco and Bahia, and here you have here Pernambuco, Bahia also, and with some difference. But we have what I'm trying to say is that we have a beginning point of. We had a beginning point of our identity, like federal units. We had a beginning point that it was like 5 centuries ago. And I don't know if we can say that Brazil, it's a federation for like for segregation federation, because we were a unit state. Why I think we can say this? Because we had already like land was the market, and the people in Pernambuco, they has an identity and values that are different from São Paulo, are different from Rio de Janeiro. We speak the same language, of course, with some regionalism, some, but we have different cultures in music or in dance or in food. We are different. I don't know if we can say that Brazil, regarding Brazilian state, I think it's a mononational federation, but we have some differences between the regions, and this is constructed, built from centuries. And regarding the specific point about cities, and now in our actual constitutions, 1988 constitutions, we have 35 years almost of our actual constitutions, of our current constitution. And in this Brazilian constitution, there are rules about creating new units, not creating new states, but incorporations of states that they already exist, or creating another states, and also creating new cities, like new municipalities. Because, and now I have to agree with Luis Fernando, the city is, we have here the municipality as an autonomic entity. I can say that is an unit of our federation. It's really a unit. And in this specific point that Luis Fernando has pointed, sorry about the double pointed, but in this specific point of that the lectures and the researchers, they don't agree about we having a municipal constitutionalism. They don't agree about this because they don't see the fundamental law. I can say like this: the fundamental law of my city as a constitution, and also because our cities, São Paulo, Recife is a big city with those problems that you have pointed, Grand Ritual has pointed. Because here I'm here in the I can here we call Boa Viagem. It's where I live here. It's here I have the beach in my front, and with big buildings, but I don't have to go like 100 or 200 meters, no, to a kilometer. I don't have to go a kilometer. We have a favela here also. And if you see the age or the quality of life, I don't know how we can say in IDH, Luis, IDH, like the index of quality of life, like this.
HDI,
human development, like this. And in the same city or in the same neighborhood, we have different ones. I can show. Let me show you. I'm gonna show you here with my camera. I don't know if you're gonna realize. Like here, I don't know if you are seeing something. Here we have buildings, and there is the beach, like 200 meters. And here we have the rich person, not the rich, but the person that can live good, like a life with the economic resources. But here, let me see if I can show you. Here, I'm in my kitchen, and like behind these buildings, we have a favela. Behind these buildings, you know, so it's different. Like we have a different reality from Europe and from like United States about autonomy. Real difference. We have real difference. But I think the main point we can think about is that autonomy is not like some organization of powers, or to do something, or to have more powers or less powers. We have to think about this, about rights, about fundamental rights, about how we can think about federalism as a progressive federalism, to decentralize powers to cities, but not to do what they want, but to increase the fundamental rights of the local citizens.
For sure. And Marcelo, if you permit me, in the pandemic, the importance of states, but also of the cities, was so much increased, especially in Brazil. We have a government that is anti-vaccine, and that worked against the vaccination of the population and spread misinformation. And we had almost 700,000 people die in the pandemic. It will be so much worse if we don't have local governments and state governments.
Of course, yes, sure.
Entirely in this period on these governments, local governments. I'm sorry, Marcelo.
No, sure, of course. And because of this, we can say that Brazil, it's like we can say, someone says that you of course, that we have a new federalism, or new Brazilian federalism after the pandemic. But I have to say this because our Brazilian federal government wasn't like didn't have so much action regarding state levels and municipality level. But well, this question about cities, Brazilian cities, and federalism, we can see about 2 points of view. First of all, if they have or not autonomy, like they are or not constitution, or they are or not units in the federation. They are component units, I can say like this. They are or not component units. And the second point is we have a municipal constitutionalism. And why this is so important? Why this difference is so important? Because of this difference has to do with realizing or reinforcing fundamental rights. Because because the core of constitutionalism is it has to do with right protection, fundamental rights. We can't think in constitutionalism only thinking about sharing powers or putting or competence or something like this. We're not putting the lens in the face, putting the lens of fundamental rights. And this is the real problem, I think, in Brazil, because nobody after '88, nobody disagree with the fact of that the cities are in fact federal units or component units. But you know, our Senate, the legislative power, the municipalities, they don't have representatives at the Senate like this. And also, well, I can talk about so many problems about this, but regarding also the federal and fiscal problem. But I think that if we can, I remember so much Bob Williams when he talked about the accordion theory about giving more subnational constitutional space. But in fact, we and the role about the Supreme Court role about giving more autonomy to create new rights. And this is, I think, this is the principal problem. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. Our Supreme Court has a centralized point of view of our federalism. After pandemic, it has maybe a try to think different about this centralized point of view. But when we have a legislative power, a municipal legislative power, they are elected by us, so they are our representatives, like a deputy. It's a municipal deputy, and if they and all the rules or the laws that they are making, the Supreme Court analyzed this making process, this making procedure, with a centralized point of view. So let me give you an example. We have competences of the cooperative federalism, and we have sharing competences. And one of those competences is like to protect disabled persons. Disabled persons, yeah. Persona con discapacidade, con disabilità. And but the rule about the traffic, you know, cars and buses, and it's a rule that it's a competence, it's a federal competence, because we have like one only rule to our Brazilian state, to all Brazilian states. So if and we had here here in Pernambuco, they tried to do a law, to make a law to permit the bus stopping, not in the point bus, like in the stop bus. If a person with disability with a share with wheels, you know, shake a hand, and the bus has to stop in some other point in the city that it wasn't the bus stop, you know, and well, and you have there a problem about, well, this is a traffic competences, that federal competence, or this is a local competence about disability, about person with disability. I wrote a paper about abortion. Here in Brazil, there's a federal rule that states that it's a criminal fact. No woman can do abortion. It's like a criminal fact.
Okay, sure.
But we have a code.
Okay.
Okay. I'm finishing.
1 minute, please.
Okay. But we have a competence of a federal competence. We have a federal competence, and we have state competence, constitutional competence about como é saúde em inglês? Sometimes saúde, about saúde, health. Yeah, health. Thank you, Flavia. About health. about health. And the state, the unit, the federal, they can make rules and laws about health. So if here in the northeast of Brazil, that we're not like in the south of Brazil, it's like a rich, but here, if we have some, if we have a huge problem of women dying because they don't have assistance, dying because of the abortion, this is a matter of public health. And in matter of public health, states can do rules about this, you know?
For sure.
Well, sorry, Luis.
You are a passionate researcher and professor, and we all understand, Marcelo. Thank you so much, Marcelo. I am worried. I will explain why. I must apologize to Professor Erika Arban because I miscalculated the time zone, and it's almost 10 o'clock, 10 p.m. in Italy. Then I'm sorry. I meant to begin this event 1 hour earlier, but I miscalculated. I'm so sorry, Professor. I don't
sorry, Erika. Sorry.
To make this.
It's no problem at all. Don't worry about that. It's totally fine.
Thank you, Marcelo. Muito obrigado, Marcelo, uma vez mais. Me perdoe pela interrupção. Eu só estava preocupado mesmo com a questão do horário, porque eu errei. A culpa é minha. Eu realmente errei o cálculo. Please, Professor Erika, do you want to make a final comment? I vous remercie. Agradeço. Je vais vous remercier. Tellement pour votre disponibilité, professeur.
No, I have to thank you really for the invitation. It was really an honor and a privilege to be here, and I really thank you for your comments and Marcelo. It was really interesting everything you said. I really liked the idea of progressive federalism. This is something that I might reflect on and think about. And you're right. We should think more about how federalism could help protecting rights and not just the usual federalism issues. And also what you said about the history of Brazil, how Brazil became a federation, make me think about how it's always difficult to generalize in federalism. It's always difficult to use broad categories because they rarely work for everybody and for all the situations. And I liked also the municipal constitutionalism part that you were explaining. So it's all extremely useful for me. So really, I'm really thankful for the opportunity. It was amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor
Arban.
It was a great pleasure. We learned a lot. We are all looking forward to your new book, just published. I will read it attentively and we will talk again. Thank you so much.
All right. And thank you for the amazing translation. I was really impressed by how accurate you were in the translation. Really outstanding.
I appreciate because this promotes the inclusion, and I appreciate your patience. Thank you so much. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Christian. Obrigado a todo mundo, toda a audiência.
Thank you.
Bye. I hope
Obrigado, Luis.
Thank
Bye,
you.
and hope to see you soon.
Yeah. Africa. Bye.
Yes,
bye.
maybe in South Africa.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Lembrando a todos e todas que nós teremos na sexta-feira o professor André Lecourt, da Universidade de Ottawa, conosco, tá? Então, conto com a presença de vocês. Um grande abraço, obrigado pela presença. Não esqueçam de assinar a lista. Valeu, gente, até mais.